welcome to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me. First, I've got to say thank you all so much for all the support on my last videos. It has been very nerve-wracking, like I said before, starting my YouTube channel again, but I'm already having so much fun getting to chat with all of you all in the comments and hear your thoughts and opinions on things. So it's been so wonderful, and just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody who is watching and supporting in any way. I really appreciated it. Okay, so this is my January recap video, and I haven't yet posted like what my actual goals are for 2025. So I'll do a little bit of that introduction here in case I don't end up actually making that video, because now it's already February. But just so you guys have an idea, I am new to this whole thing, so I'm not going to have an outrageous goal for my first year. So my idea is to have 4 books a month that I'm reading, which ends up being 48 books by the end of the year. That's going to be my goal. I don't want to set something that's so unrealistic and then I feel bogged down by not having reached it. So 4 books a month I think feels really good for me. And there'll be a whole variety of like what types of books I read in a month. I don't want to be too structured. But I do have a book club that I'm in at home. So I'll always be reading the one book club book that I have, just with my friends. And then obviously 3 more books of my choosing. And I think in my mind, I would kind of like for a book to be like a nonfiction book, or, you know, something. But then I'm like, then 3 books is really not that many to be going through all the fiction books that I want to read. So TBD on if I'll throw nonfiction in there. I kind of feel like I'll end up tossing that out the window, but we'll see. I'm going to be doing 4 books a month, which is 48 books. And then hopefully by the end of the year, I've actually been able to read a couple extra and I can like go past 50, but I'm not going to set an unrealistic goal for my first time here. So in case I don't end up making like a goal for 2025 video, that's kind of my structure. Oh, okay, and I'm also gonna say, this is obviously my first month doing this. So I don't have like a great concept of what I want the structure of this type of review to be, like my monthly recaps. So what I'm doing now very well may be very different in a couple months when I get like a better footing for what's helpful and just like hearing your all's feedback. So please give me any extra information that you would like for me to hear. Like if you want me to break it down more in the comments or in the videos, please let me know in the comments. If there's something like specific that you all like from this type of video, let me know and I will be happy to adjust as I see fit. But for right now, this month, I'm just gonna walk through them and tell you what I thought about them. So my first book that I'm starting with is actually the last one that I finished, and that is From Here to the Great Unknown. This was an autobiography written by Lisa Marie Presley in collaboration with her daughter, Riley Keough. Lisa Marie actually passed away during the process of preparing to write this book. Riley was already helping her write it, so then once her mother passed, Riley took it upon herself to finish the book. I gave this book 3 stars, and to be so honest, I've never read an autobiography that I gave any more than 3 stars. They're just really not like my super area of interest, so it will be really hard for them to get something higher than that, but obviously can see where people love these types of books. It's just like not my niche area of interest. But it was interesting to hear more about this family. Obviously Elvis Presley is such an icon, and I can't imagine being Lisa Marie Presley growing up in the shadow of your father. So it was very interesting hearing a bit more about their story. Let me explain the structure. So obviously Lisa Marie had started writing this book. She had some voice memos that she played in the audiobook, which is why I heard people recommend the audiobook, and that's why, because she actually pops in and has some voice recordings in there. So she had already started brainstorming for this book, and then obviously, like I said, passed away during it. So then Riley, her daughter, steps in to kind of fill in some gaps of the story, as well as share some of her perspectives on what it was like growing up with Lisa Marie as her mother. So it's kind of this tag team autobiography. And one thing that made me most sad about the book is, other than just like some of the, you know, really hard retellings of some of those stories, Lisa Marie talked about never quite, like, she wanted to do music, but she couldn't do it outside of the shadow of her father, and her life was never really about her. It was just about her being Elvis's daughter. And then I hated, because her autobiography wasn't really that either, because it's like half Riley's story about Lisa Marie being her mom. And while that's still about Lisa Marie, it just, I was like, this poor woman, even this kind of felt like her autobiography wasn't even just about her. The audiobook is really good. Riley Kehoe reads her portions, and then Julia Roberts voices the Lisa Marie portions of the book. So that's really great. Julia Roberts does a really good job. And then, like I mentioned, there are audio clips of Lisa Marie talking in the book as well. So you're having these like 3 different voices and perspectives throughout the whole thing. So for that part, it was interesting. And obviously that's not something totally normal for another audiobook. Most people are still alive when their books are released. So that's a unique take on it. I will say there is so little about this book that I relate to in any form or fashion, obviously, because my dad was not a iconic rock star. Love you, Dad, but he certainly was not Elvis Presley. So there's a lot of the fame stuff that is just like really hard for me to comprehend. And obviously I wasn't alive when Elvis was at his peak. So just like the absolute stardom, godlike figure that Elvis, the influence that he had, was very prominent. And even from Lisa Marie's perspective too, like she definitely viewed her father in that same light. If you're interested in that whole world, definitely check it out. I love Riley Kehoe. I think she's great. I loved her in Davy Jones and the Six. So yeah, I was interested to just hear more about her life, but again, an audiobook is just never for me, so it got a solid 3 stars. Did I say an audiobook? I meant an autobiography. And I also feel so inherently weird, like rating someone's life, you know? Like, this one was only 4 stars if this one was 2. I feel bad if it's like someone's story. So I usually always just fall middle of the road 3 stars. I'll go ahead and I'll just work up from 3 to 5. Because I had 2 5-star reads this month, which is crazy. My next book that I have for you is The Lion Women of Tehran. And I gave this book 4 stars. I really liked it, and this is one that I will definitely suggest many people read. So, The Lion Women of Tehran, this was my book club's book pick for this month. So, I read it alongside all my friends, and this story follows 2 girls that we meet, Homa and Ellie, and they both live in Iran, and it's their story of meeting when they're just small girls, like 7 years old in school, and following kind of the trajectory of both of their lives. It is really, really, really a beautiful story about friendship. I too have like a lifelong best friend. Like, we moved across the street from each other when we were 4, and she just turned 30, I'm about to turn 30, and we're still best friends. So I really relate with this kind of storyline of just the unending love that you feel for another friend. Taylor, if you're out there, I love you so much. I was going into this book expecting it to be highly, highly, highly emotional. Obviously, there is like so much turmoil and just historical upheaval in Iran, and it has a lot of like high tension plot point. Just a lot of the political unrest in Iran at the time plays into the storyline a lot in these 2 girls who kind of have like differing political ideals and what they're willing to sacrifice for, what they're willing to fight for, and what surviving that political turmoil really looks like to 2 separate people. So yeah, it's a very fascinating story. But also is not one that's too emotionally heavy that someone who doesn't like feeling upset from a book wouldn't be too much to read. I think it's pretty even keel for the majority of it. At least it is for me. I love a book that wrecks me, so maybe I have a bad perspective on that, but I'll just say I was expecting it to feel much heavier and destructive than it was. And I think it like landed very gracefully in the middle of like a beautifully tender and heartbreaking story, but not overwhelming, if that makes sense. The plot line is intriguing throughout. I would say this is like a very fast-paced book. I could see where it would maybe, some of the feedback from the girls in my group said it was kind of slow for them to buy into at first, and I think that could be true. I started listening to this one on audiobook because the audiobook became available before the physical book did for me. So I started listening to it that way, and I think that was really good because there's a lot of like the Iranian foods that they're talking about in the language, like things that they're saying to each other that I feel like I wouldn't have connected with quite as much reading it at first, just because they're unfamiliar words. I don't know how to pronounce them. Whereas when you're hearing it, it automatically puts you in that headspace of being in that culture, hearing how they sound, what they eat, describing the food. Like, so I feel like it worked really well for me to start this in audio. I really appreciate the pace of the book. It keeps you on your toes. There's always something you're like, oh gosh, like an anticipation of what's gonna happen next. So yeah, the plot I was really into the whole time. I'm a big foodie. I love cooking, I love baking. I love hearing about people like culturally, what's important for them around food. And this book was fraught with that. There's constantly bringing up like different recipes. And then Homa, her family, we see food as like a real language of love, like in comfort and teaching people how to cook. And so I just really relate with that a lot. That felt very fun for me to read, and it made me want to eat Iranian food so bad. I was like, I need to find an Iranian restaurant, which I don't have here near me where I live, but I could probably find something not too far. So yeah, I loved that food played such a big part in this. Some of the things that kept me from giving it 5 stars. I really felt like there was, and this is intentional, a strong like imbalance of the 2 main characters that we're reading. Our perspective from the majority of the book is from Ellie, and to be frank, Ellie is, in my opinion, the least likable character of the 2 girls. I just feel like there were some things that I didn't love about her personality that made me not want to be in her headspace. And it wasn't dramatic, but I just felt like I was reading, I'm like, God, you're being such a bad friend. Or like, think, Ellie, think, what are you doing? Why are you saying this? Why are you doing these things? Like, so much of it just felt like I could pick apart her brain space. And I also tend to feel like a bad friend sometimes. So maybe I'm like projecting a lot of like my own insecurities onto Ellie. But yeah, I had a hard time being in her headspace for so long, and I was really, really wishing that we were from Homa's perspective, which is so intentional that we're not, and it all makes sense why we aren't. But Homa is like this character that everybody wants to be. She is so resilient, she's so strong, she stands up for what she believes, she takes nothing from nobody. She is just this strong, even from the time she's like 6 years old, she is just such a firecracker. And I just feel like everybody wants to be that person. And so the fact that we were in the perspective of Ellie sometimes was like, I don't want to be listening to what you are saying. I want to hear Homa's thoughts about it. So that was just a hard dynamic that I had. And again, that's intentional, but just wasn't always like the most fun time for me reading from her perspective. And then I think the biggest thing that kept this from being like a really fantastic book in my mind is that and again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a character who is introduced towards like the last third of the book. We end up spending a lot of time on that character, which is great because it makes sense for the storyline and everything that comes to fruition. Like, it's purposeful, but I personally just did not care as much having a lot of the plot fall around this new character that we've now met and I just don't inherently feel the same attachment to. And I feel bad saying that because it's one of the girl's daughters. And so you're like, okay, it's sweet that we're all figuring out this relationship and this dynamic. But honestly, I was just like, I just want to hear about these two women. Like, that's what I wanted to hear about. I'm trying not to say anything that's like spoiling anything. But I really just wanted to focus on these two women who we've now followed like through their whole life. That's what I wanted to focus on. And I didn't care as much about this daughter that had now entered the picture. That was my main thing that kept me from wanting to give this 5 stars. But the story, oh my gosh, it's so wonderful. I learned so much about the Iranian government. It's just history to learn from, for sure, of how quickly government can come in and change everything about the way a country runs. So yeah, it was eye-opening and heartbreaking to learn about these stories and learn about the history, but I feel like the author did it in such a way that was like approachable and met with such hope and resilience that, yeah, it's just a really beautiful story, and I think everyone would really like this book. I believe the author also wrote The Stationery Shop, which I think a lot of people have said they like as much, if not better, than this one. So I'm very curious to pick that one up too. After reading this one, I will definitely read The Stationery Shop for sure. Okay, and then I had 2 5-star reads this month, which is very abnormal for me. I would say that is not common at all. So I was pumped to have 2 5-star reads. I'll start first. Sorry, dropped my pen again. I'll start first with Betty, and that was written by Tiffany McDonald. And this book is a biographical, is that a word? That word does not sound right to my head. She has based this character Betty around her mother and her resilience through her childhood. So yeah, very interesting. I will say this book did get 5 stars for me, but up until the very end, I thought it was going to get 4 stars. This book is a labor of love to get through. It needs every trigger warning in the book. It needs trigger warnings that you probably didn't know there were trigger warnings for. It is, I mean, dare I say, horrific to get through at times. So I just very strongly caution people moving through this book if that heaviness bothers you. I would just be very hesitant. I wouldn't say this is a book that really has a ton of like spoiling opportunities. So if that is something you're sensitive to, just look into it, look into the plot lines and see what might bother you and if it's a book that you think is good for you or not, because it is heavy. Like I said, probably would have given it 4 stars until the very last like 50 to 75 pages. I was like, yes, like, yes, this is what I wanted. This was what I needed. Like, I was needing some for what I bought into this book. It is, I think it's like 480 pages. It's not too much, but for the fact that literally almost every single page is misery until the last like 50 pages, it feels very long. It is a labor of love to get through this book. Now, what I will say, as much as this book is traumatic and graphic and horrific to read, it is equal parts beautiful prose that has like some of the most beautifully descriptive language that I've ever read in a book. So it's like this perfect marriage of like beautiful and traumatic. It's just, it feels like a masterpiece that all comes together in like this weird, crazy way. I don't know that I really gave a recap of this. Sorry, I'm gonna get better at this, I swear. I promise I will be better. But it follows the story of Betty, who is one of 8 children who grows up with a Cherokee father and a white mother. And it is the story of when we meet her, I think when she's like, well, we meet her parents kind of initially. But I think the youngest we hear of her saying her age is like 6 years old maybe, and then follows her into like her early adulthood. You will meet some of the best characters in this book and the worst characters ever. Like her dad and Freya and Trustin and Lint, like wonderful characters. And then Flossie, Mom, and Leland, they're just like these literal demons living inside this home. So yeah, it is complicated family dynamics at its best. The text is beautiful. I mean, it really just felt like a masterpiece. I will say Demon Copperhead is one of my favorite books of all time, especially modern, that has come out recently. And I think Demon Copperhead is the book that I can most compare to Betty in the very long, traumatic, drawn out life that feels like I cannot possibly keep reading this. But then it pays off. Like, it is worth it. It's not just like trauma dumping to be for the sake of it. It has purpose and it's filled with hope and a story that you can overcome literally anything. But again, look up if this book will be for you, because there's horrific. If you've read this book, you don't have to comment about it in the comments because I don't want it to be a public situation. But the kittens, that is all I can say. I actually have no words for that scene, and I wanted to put the book down after this and was just like, what in the world am I reading? What am I reading? Like, I felt crazy reading this book. And since it's like based on her mother's life, there are things like the kitten situation that I question. I'm like, why would anyone write this? It feels like you are just writing traumatic stuff to write it. But then I'm like, if this is based on her mother's life, I'm so curious which of these events were based on real life, because if that actually happened and something like that, oh my God. Like, so yeah, I'd be curious to hear more. And maybe Tiffany McDonald's done interviews or something where she talks more about like what was actually inspired by this book from her mom. But yeah, I would be very curious to hear that, because I do feel like there's a line that you can cross when like traumatic events are intentional in a book and when it is just like stirring up emotion and drama and sadness for the sake of doing it because it wants to be like a dramatic book. I think there is a fine line between those two things, and Betty is that line. Like, it lays on that line. But if it is inspired by her mom's real life story, I'm like, it feels like one of those books that's like, this feels too crazy, nobody would write this. You know what I mean? And I feel like that stuff can sometimes happen in real life. So if that is really based on her mom, if that situation really happened to her mom, oh my God. But it did end up getting a 5 for me. The end, I was like, okay, I can get behind this. I can get behind this book. It was so good. Okay, and then my last book and my second 5-star book from the month of January was Red Rising. I finally started the Red Rising series and I'm so obsessed with it. It's so good. That was the first book I actually read this month, and I made myself read other books in between Red Rising and The Golden Sun, because I knew I would read all those books in a row and then be in a slump, and like nothing compares to reading these. So I was like, I cannot jump right into the second one. I have to read something in between. So Golden Sun is going to be my first book that I start in February. So I'm so excited. But yes, Red Rising, I gave this 5 stars. I thought it was so good. This is a sci-fi fantasy book that opens up where we learn that the human race is now on Mars. What we come to learn, without too much information, is that this government operates under a like color hierarchical system. So we have the Reds, who are the very bottom, who are these miners on Mars, up to the Golds, who are like the elite, highest of the high, most important government figures. And there's violets and pinks and everyone in between who all has like a different category of what they operate in. I mean, Red Rising kind of gives the point of the plot, but it's basically one red boy's perspective that we are in. His name is Darrow, and his desire to rise rise against the government. This was so good. This book was so good. It is so exciting the whole time. There literally was not one point where I was like, okay, I'm ready to get through this part. Every moment of this book, I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I will say a lot of it, I did not expect the route that we took. So the beginning of the book is kind of following Darrow and his family as they're very much so like the least of these type figures. Like they're not given food, they have to ration everything. It is straight up District 12 vibes for the Reds. We see early on the dynamic between these other lower class figures, and even the dynamic there where some of these people are set up even more so for success than what Darrow and his family and his group are. So we're very much aware on a small scale that there is some systematic rules in place that are not catering towards the Reds. So that is very much the ideal that we know from the beginning. But the absolute roller coaster this book takes us on, I couldn't believe it. Every second I was turning the page like I was not expecting that. I'm just a sucker for characters. I love characters. The plot could be giving absolutely nothing. The plot could be giving me nothing. And if there's good characters, I'm locked in. And this book has the best characters. It has the best characters. And there is one character who I'm just like, I'm just so obsessed with him. I'm so obsessed with him. Again, this is a big series, so I have no idea where this goes after the first book. So I'll be curious to like look back and see what my thoughts were on this. But right now I will say Severo, he is my guy. I love him. I'm obsessed. Every time he pops up on the page, I'm like, what is gonna happen? I love this scrappy little crazy character. I'm obsessed with him, and I want him to have such a huge impact on these stories. I want it so bad. I don't know what's gonna happen, but he is definitely my favorite character right now, for sure, without a doubt. And this story, I was reading it at first and I was like, I think I mentioned before in my video that I just finished reading The Hunger Games. So I was reading this book and I was like, okay, this is just The Hunger Games. Like, of course this man tries to come and like rewrite The Hunger Games, even though Suzanne Collins like already did it perfectly. So it has definitely the basis of a Hunger Games feel, but it does part pretty drastically. Yeah, if you have any interest in the Hunger Games type books at all, I don't see how there's any way that you wouldn't love this book. So I, again, am just very much so like dancing on the surface of sci-fi and fantasy, but this book is the one that made me want to get into it. And I'm so excited for the rest of this whole series. I'm so excited. The one thing I will say about this book, I feel like the author, I think his name is Pierce Brown, the author does not like placate to the audience when describing the sci-fi elements of the story. So when I first started it, I was like, what is going on? They quite literally drop you into the, like, literally into the surface of Mars. You are drilling underneath Mars. You're drilling in Mars, and they're talking about hell divers, and they're talking about all kinds of like sci-fi language. There's like like elemental language that they're talking about, and creatures that they're talking about, and there's like no work done to explain what any of that means to the reader. So there's like lingo that they're using, and like I can't even think of all the things that they say right at the beginning, but you're trying to like grasp a picture of what's happening. Like, okay, this boy is riding on a drill underneath Mars. He's trying to avoid this helium bubble. Like, what is going on? Like, you're really trying to get an idea of what is happening, but the author is like not giving you any extra context clues for like, this is what like, I literally can't even think of the words. I couldn't come up with them if I wanted to. He's not explaining, going into depths about what this is or what this weapon looks like. He just kind of lays it out there, and you learn as you go based on context clues. So I do feel like the beginning of it could potentially be overwhelming for someone walking into it of like, okay, I'm having a hard time visualizing what's going on here. I had that a little bit, but was so intrigued by the story, and I think the author does a good job of getting you interested in the storyline early enough that even if you're not fully aware of everything that's happening around you and like what the setting looks like, you can move forward because you're like, okay, but I'm very curious about what this means. Yeah, I just couldn't recommend this book enough. It's fantasy, it's sci-fi, it's exciting, it is deeply heartfelt. Talk about characters. Again, some of the best characters you will meet are in this book. Oh, I think anyone should pick up this book and at least give it a try. If fantasy and sci-fi is not your thing, you really may not like it, but anyone who's even remotely interested in it, I think you have got to pick it up. It is so good, and I have been chomping at the bit to get to the next books. I am so excited. So yeah, just a quick overview. We had From Here to the Great Unknown. I gave that 3 stars. Nothing to write home about. Then we had The Lion Women of Tehran. I gave 4 stars. Betty, which I gave 5 stars. And Red Rising, which I gave 5 stars, which is a pretty fabulous way to start off the year. Thank you all so much for following along. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I have my handle linked in the description box below. I'll also be posting a lot on there, and that will probably be more like day-to-day stuff of like thoughts on the book or posting in my stories what I'm thinking. So definitely follow along there if you all want some more information from like what I'm reading throughout the week. It'll be great. And I did just get a big shipment of books in that I have been dying to have in my library. So a lot of them are books that I've already read that are 5 stars that I just need to have the physical copy of so I can reference back and look at them again. And some of them are just books that I have really been wanting to read. They were Thrift Books was having a good sale, so I got some of those. I'm really excited, and hopefully you'll see some of those in my months to come, February, March, and after. So yeah, thank you all so much, and please let me know any feedback in the comments of how you would like to prefer, or how you would prefer this structure be. Obviously it was a mess, and I promise I'll be better next time. But yeah, any comments, if you've read any of these books, any recommendations you want me to add to my list for this year, please let me know. But again, thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.